In the previous video, we installed TinyCore Linux in EventG, configured DHCP networking using Cloud Zero, enabled SSH, and made the configuration persistent. In this video, we'll extend the setup by adding a second network interface to TinyCore PC. We'll keep Ethernet 0 connected to Cloud Zero for internet access and downloads. And we'll use the Ethernet 1 interface as a static IP interface inside the lab network. And this is our lab topology. In this lab, we can see the TinyCore PC, which is already connected to Cloud Zero through E0 interface, which we have already configured DHCP in our previous lab. In this lab, we are going to add one more interface, Ethernet 1 interface, which in turn is going to connect to the switch. And the switch already connected to router and to VPCs. This router and VPCs I have already configured in the 10.10.10.0/24 network. Now we will see how to connect this tiny core with switch. I'll connect the other interface to switch Ethernet 1 interface. Click Save. I'll start this device. Now I'll open this device. It is loaded. I'll open the terminal to check the IP address. Here we can see under Ethernet 0 interface, it received IP address DHCP IP address 1.179 from my home network through E0 interface, and the additional interface Ethernet 1 interface. Here we can see there is no IP address configured. So we'll see how to configure static IP address now. For that, I'm going to switch over to SSH session, which I have already configured in my previous video lab. Now I'll do the SSH from my local host PC. I'll enter password. Now once again we'll check the IP address. Here you can see under Ethernet 0 interface, it received IP address from the Cloud Zero home network, and Ethernet 1 it did not receive, or we did not configure any IP address yet. And we will check the internet connectivity as it connected to the home router. It's working as expected. Now we will see how to configure static IP address in the Ethernet 1 interface. This is the command to configure static IP in the TinyCore PC. ifconfig. Here we can see the interface name Ethernet 1 and the IP address 10.10.10.10 and subnet mask 255.255.255.0, and interface is a link is up, and I'll hit enter. We have to use the sudo command before ifconfig. Now it is added, so we will check the IP address again. Here we can see now we successfully configured the IP address for Ethernet 1 interface. As we have configured this IP address manually, it will not survive after reboot. We will verify that too. Sudo reboot. I will SSH again. We'll check IP address. Here we can see now we lost the IP address under Ethernet 1 interface. Now we will configure a persistent static IP on Ethernet 1 interface. Instead of configuring the IP manually every time, we'll create a startup script for the Ethernet 1 interface. Before that, we will check the op directory. Here we can see Under the auth directory, we are having this file list bootlocal.sh and ethernet0.sh. This one I have created during the last video for Ethernet 0 interface, and we can check that too. Using VA editor, we can check that, which we have created for Ethernet 0 interface. Here we can see this is the script we have created for Ethernet 0 interface so that it can receive the IP address directly from Cloud 0 using DHCP. It's still available. I will exit. And like that, we have to create startup script for Ethernet 1 interface, and we have to write the command for static IP inside that. So we will create Ethernet 1 interface script. Here I will paste my commands. This is the static IP for lab network for Ethernet 1 interface. And here we can see the same command which we have used for manually configure. And I added one more command below that. This is the default gateway to get a default gateway that I pointed it to the lab router that we can see in our lab topology. This is our default gateway for all these three devices. Now I will save and exit. Now we have successfully configured the script for Ethernet 1 interface. We can check once again in the auth directory which we have created. Here we can see our newly created script added, but one difference you can see all other script files are in green color, but this one Ethernet 1 is still white color. So what we have to do, that means it is not executable. We have to convert it into the executable file. For that we have to use change mode, let's say X, and the file name. Now we can check it once again whether it converted to executable file. Here we can see it changed into the full executable format. We can check the status here. Now we have successfully created the startup script for Ethernet 1 interface. And now we have to add this script details into the bootlocal file. We have to update the bootlocal file, which we have used and updated in the previous video for Ethernet 0 interface. Now, after that, we have to include the Ethernet 1 interface script below that. So I'll open the bootlocal script now. Here we can see the script which we created earlier for Ethernet 0 interface. This is a script file name, and then we included the SSH to start the SSH services automatically during the boot. We have included this line, and the host name also we have included in that, so that host name every time after the reboot it will survive. Now, so what we are going to do, we are going to include the next one. This one I'll copy and paste and edit for Ethernet 1. Here we will change it as Ethernet 1, and instead of Cloud 0 I will change it to Lab Network and Ethernet 1 instead of Ethernet 0, Ethernet 1. So we have successfully updated the bootlocal file, which includes Ethernet 0 and Ethernet 1 startup script along with SSH configurations and hostname. Now I will save and exit the file. One important step we have to do after configuring Ethernet 1 startup script and bootlocal script file, we have to save it. For that we have to use this command filetool.sh -b. It will back up the files to the mydata.tgz file. Now we have to verify the Ethernet 1 interface static IP is persistent after the reboot. So I'm going to do the reboot now. It is rebooted, so I will do the SSH now. Here we will check the IP address for Ethernet 1 interface. Yeah, now we can clearly see under Ethernet 1 interface, it received the IP address which we have configured statically through the startup script ethernet1.sh. So now our IP address is static IP is persist inside the Ethernet 1 interface. This is how we have to configure it and make it persistent. And finally, we will check the connectivity between three devices, which we have configured, added in the lab. For that, I have to start the switch. Once it booted, we can check the connectivity between these three devices. I'll show the IP address of each devices. This is our router IP address. This is the default gateway 10.10.10.1, and VPC1 we have already configured with 10.10.10.11 and VPC2 configured with 10.10.12. Now the switch is booted. We will check the connectivity between TinyCore and other two PCs. So I'll ping the IP address of, this is the IP address of VPC1. It's working as expected. And we will check connectivity between VPC2 and TinyCore. It is also working as expected, and we'll check the connectivity between the default gateway, that is our router, and TinyCore. This is also working fine. That's it. This is how we have to configure persistent static IP to TinyCore PC. At this point, TinyCore is acting as a normal PC inside the lab. Ethernet 0 is used for internet access and downloads, and Ethernet 1 is used for lab connectivity with a persistent static IP. Thanks for watching.